A cabinet minister suggests the notion of regulating social media, and Canada is set to become the first ever to build a negative emissions plant. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. The elections are growing closer and closer. You can really start to feel the tension in the air. Today, an article from The Guardian comes out, and its headline, Canada may regulate social media to avoid election meddling. Right off the bat, that's an incredibly foolish notion, and a cabinet minister shouldn't be making these claims, but I'm going to get more into that a little bit later. First, let's talk about what the article says. So, as I just mentioned, it was a quote from a cabinet minister who is in charge of the voting procedures for the upcoming federal election. And they are basically making a case that social media companies aren't doing enough to help Canada combat foreign meddling, which is a top priority for them this election. They don't want a foreign power to be influencing the results of the federal election. The government plays a game of good policy, bad policy here, and let's start with the good policy aspect of it. I thought this was a good idea and a good step to combating election misdoings. The first thing they did was they set up meetings with Google, Twitter, and Facebook, and at these meetings they started to brainstorm and discuss ideas on how they can promote transparency, integrity, and basically get a plan together to eliminate the risks of a foreign power or even trolls influencing the election via posting things like fake news, propaganda, and just in general lies that would alter the way people vote, and they don't want people to be misled by things that aren't true. There was recent proposals from Facebook and Google in terms of advertisements where they would require the people who are making political campaign ads, well, first of all, they'd be paid, and if you're going to be creating one of these things, you would have to provide documentation proving who you are, and it would basically be a heightened sense of security, so not any random troll on the internet can create ads that look political when they're really not. And this would better discriminate against people who are out there just to cause a scene and those who are really out there to promote a platform. So this entire process of brainstorming, meeting up, talking about ideas, the companies going back to their CEOs and raising the issue to them, trying to get approval for the changes, it was really time consuming, and obviously the elections are fast approaching. So the cabinet minister felt like that things weren't moving at a pace that they would like to see. So what's new proposal? To take things into their own control and implement a change of censorship, essentially, at the discretion of the current government. And I find this to be highly ironic because a change like this literally opens the floodgates to election meddling. The thing they're trying to combat, they're going to better enable with this change. So first of all, a government controlling the means of mass communication? Yeah, right, like there's no chance of them misusing that power eventually. It's highly dangerous to have a government body in control of the way most people digest information. And you can look at it from 2 points of view. So let's look at the winning situation and a losing situation. So if you afford these powers of censorship and control to the government, where they can alter whatever they want on social media, because keep in mind, it's very discretionary. The whole thing here is getting rid of propaganda, but even that itself, if a government is in control of the election meddling and regulation, they have the power to label anything they want propaganda if it doesn't fit with their current agenda. And because they'll instantly be removing these things off social media, they'll be the filter. It won't even get to you, so you won't be able to judge whether or not it really is or it isn't. It could be the best point from the opposition ever. It could be something that's going to change your mind and the way you're going to vote in this election. But since the government doesn't want to give that to you, they want to keep control of the powers that are afforded to them, they're going to eliminate the message, say it's something like propaganda, say it's a lie, say it's fake news, and they're going to expect you to blindly just ingest that and go with the flow. If a government feels somewhat confident and they're in control and they want to use these powers for evil, they can start doing things like I just mentioned, suppression. They can suppress opposing parties, suppress opposing political views, and by giving them the rights, basically the keys to social media and the filtering process, they'll be able to choose what you can see and what you can't see. Extremely dangerous because they have an invested interest. They want you to see things that make them look the best way possible. And they're going to block things that do the opposite of that because they want to get power and they want to maintain it. Now, look on the other side of the equation. What if a government is in control and things are looking bad for them? It's very likely they're going to lose the next election. They start to get desperate. What might they do? They might use this power afforded to them to do things like create propaganda themselves, create lies and push that out to you. And because they are the filter, you can't have the publisher be the filter as well on such a grand scale. They'll create whatever they want, and since they're the filter as well, they're the fail-safe, they're going to let it pass by, let it get to you, and you won't know any better because that's all there is. You're trusting the government to censor and get rid of stuff that's not true. So it's a very dangerous situation that we'll be creating by going down this rabbit hole. The government might make a point that we're screwed either way, essentially, and it's either we give them the power and hope they do the best thing possible, or we take our chances with a foreign government doing some crazy influencing in the election, or people posting fake news, whatever. But from my point of view, it undercuts the integrity that we place within the government, and they don't really have an argument to be making where we would be allowing them to be put in a position where they can abuse the powers given to them. It's not an ideal situation because we have to assume too many factors. Rules need to be put in place to make sure those in power don't overdo it and don't become obsessed with maintaining it. In other words, basically giving them the keys to immortality and hoping that they don't use it is a terrible bet. It's better off to remove the keys entirely and find a different solution to tackle election fraud that doesn't involve such a potent risk. But we're not completely defenseless. See, we have an organization known as the CSE. It's the Communication Security Establishment, and they did some research into the probabilities of foreign interference within the election, and they basically found 3 findings. The first one is that it's likely that there will be an attempt by some foreign power to give some type of influence and create a cyber interference in the election. So basically, we're in a situation where it's highly probable someone's going to try something. But at the same time, their second finding, it's unlikely it will be effective or on a large scale due to, in part, to the raised public awareness that we have around these kind of threats now. So the American election, for example, the whole Russian thing caught a lot of people off guard, the whole fake news situation. To a lot of people, it was their first time ever dealing with such an issue. They weren't accustomed to having to think critically about the things they saw on social media because the whole fake news controversy really started recently. And obviously, since the dawn of social media, there's been trolls, there's been fake stuff out there. But to a lot of people, it was swept under the rug, really. And this event basically caused the issue to rise to the forefront of popular media. Everyone's attention was on it. So now, in our current context, a lot of people are aware of the possibility of fake news, and you can see it. A lot of people are fact-checking the stuff they see online now. There's a lot of commenters who call out stuff they see that's wrong. And we're a more active community. People are more aware. And that's the finding that the CSC basically came across. They find that it's unlikely that the influence, even if it comes through, it's unlikely it'll have a massive impact on us because now we are better equipped to deal with it. And their third finding, which I find to be the most critical and the most informative piece, it is that the odds of an adversary creating enough ripples to overturn the results of the election are basically almost non-existent due to our usage of paper ballots in Canada. So for those of you who don't know, we're still old school when it comes to the federal election. At least we don't do electronic voting. It's all paper. So that's really a layer of additional security we have because it means we're less vulnerable compared to an online voting system. With online voting, there are some pros such as convenience and higher turnouts, but there's also major cons. You have to deal with hacking now. You have to protect your servers. People can make fake accounts to start voting on behalf of whatever, but you can't make a fake person. Voting with ballots actually forces the user to leave their house and show up personally. And because of this, the whole hacking thing really isn't an issue. There's very few ways that you can alter these results. Maybe you buy someone who's running the elections to count wrong or something like that. But these ways are less plentiful compared to the world of digital, where a very skilled computer hacker could just get into your system and do whatever they want. If we assume some credibility to the findings of the CSC, then it seems like the government is probably jumping to a massive conclusion here with their proposed notion of regulating social media. It seems like that there is a threat, but the CSC is saying it's not a major one. So them jumping to a major fix for something not so severe indicates to me that there may be some type of overreaction or, in the worst case, a hidden agenda here with this proposal. Really, this entire notion of controlling the means that we consume information opens up a path to chaos that doesn't need to be tampered with. Only a fool could conjure up such a suggestion. I think it's a great idea for the government to control social media and have the power of influence. It basically neglects the right that we have to free speech when we start tampering with these things. I'm not saying that there isn't an issue, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying the proposal on the table is not a valid way to approach things. Like what they were doing in the first place, trying to increase transparency, trying to raise levels of integrity on these platforms, I think is a good start. And they should continue to work on that with the companies to figure out how they can increase security without having to resort to complete government control. So this cabinet minister can continue to make all the wild notions and ideas and conjure up madness all they want, really. But I think as a nation, we're more aware and we can see how absurd it is. So I wish them the best of luck with tackling the issue, and I hope they find an alternative soon because this is not the way. So, in more exciting news, a Canadian company is now set to be the first ever to build a negative emissions plant. The entire concept of the plant is to pull a megaton of carbon emissions from the atmosphere every year. And before I move on, a megaton. I didn't even know that was actually a unit of metric measurement. It sounds like something from the Transformers and the Decepticons, like the name of one of the biggest trucks or something, the Megaton, or a weapon in Star Wars, something like that. So basically that's the equivalent of planting 40 million trees. So that's obviously going to have numerous positive effects on the environment. And the company behind this is called Carbon Engineering, and they're receiving mind-blowing amounts of funding to get this thing off the ground. Even Silicon Valley venture capitalists are getting in on this right now. It's also important to note that they're already past the testing phase of the technology. They had a pilot in a small city, and now they're ready to expand it and really build up this plant. It's pretty cool how this tech supposedly works. So the first thing it does, as I mentioned, is it pulls the carbon emissions from the atmosphere and it transforms that into a liquid that is then stored. The ultimate goal of this company is really to create a literal carbon recycling cycle almost. It will turn the content that's collected into fuels that can power a range of things like cars and trucks. And that's really the sector that the company is trying to target most and where it really wants to reduce emissions in the vehicle industry. So it's going to collect the carbon from the atmosphere and create fuel out of that. And then it's going to supply the fuel back to these cars and trucks. Then what's going to happen? The cars and trucks are going to create more emissions, and the plant is going to siphon the emissions again from the atmosphere and create more fuel. And the ultimate goal really is to create a sustainable cycle here. It's really interesting how things are going, and it's amazing how rapidly our technology is improving to be able to do something like this. One of the main things I have to say about this is Canada better secure this company. It really has all the potential and the workings to become a giant in not only technology, but environmental services. So in a past episode, I talked about how we need to do this more with Canadian companies. We need to develop our tech industry so it can compete in the international community. And this right here is a step towards that. We have a dominant force now in Canada, and it's just starting. We even have venture capitalists from Silicon Valley who are investing millions and millions of dollars. And it's rumored that Bill Gates is even looking at the company. I don't think he's invested yet, but it's caused attention. And I think anything of this scale would catch anyone's attention, really. It's truly magnificent what they've been able to accomplish. So let's not drop the ball here. It's amazing that Silicon Valley investors want to help us get started, but obviously they have their sights set on acquisition. They want this. They want this plant. And as Canadians, I feel like we should try and protect this. This is something really cool that we have going. It could really become something that we're proud of, an icon of Canada. Like, we don't really have our own Apple or Google. Well, maybe this carbon engineering firm can be that for us. It can be what the young engineers over at the top universities in Canada want to work for. This could be the thing. So let's rally and let's hope that it continues to grow. And most of all, kind of selfish, but let's hope it stays Canadian. Obviously, the environmental impacts are amazing no matter who owns it, but we can harness that power for good in terms of Canadian growth and prosperity as well. I say go for it. It's a great idea, and I'm wishing them the best. So now on to our final story, and the headline is pretty crazy. Let me read it to you. So a van was stopped at the Canadian border with a corpse in the back seat. Sounds pretty creepy, right? But this story is not going to play out how you might expect. So this Canadian and his two elderly parents were reportedly on a vacation in Florida. They drove down from Canada down to Florida. Pretty long ride. So on their way back from vacation, something pretty tragic happened. So in America, on the road, the father, it was a guy, his mom and his dad, the father suffered a heart attack. And the mother and the son didn't want to use the American healthcare system because of the costs and flying the body back, etc. So let me make one thing clear though. So the heart attack was fatal. The individual died, and now the mother and the son were left with a choice. It's like, what do we do? We're on the road right now on the way back home, and we're still in America. If we report it here, we're gonna have to pay certain costs, such as, like I mentioned, flying the body back, etc. I guess medical examinations to make sure he's actually dead, stuff like that. So what they decided to do was they literally just loaded him up in the back of the car, literally a decomposing body in the back seat. That sounds insane, right? And they continued on their way. So keep in mind, it's from Miami, Florida, all the way back to Canada. That is a trek. And you have a deceased, like, limp corpse just chilling in the backseat as you're doing that. Like, that whole mental picture is highly disturbing. Obviously, for us, it's easy to be like, we would never do something as crazy as that, right? But in like a twisted sort of way, you can kind of see where they're coming from. So here's an example of just how expensive things can be if you get injured or even killed, I guess, while you're on vacation. So even something like breaking a leg can cost upwards of $20,000 just for treatment if that happens in America. So I know if that was me and I had the choice of either paying $20,000 if I broke my leg or trying to find my way out back to Canada to get my treatment, which will cost way less, be almost free because of the system we have here, I might be tempted to just try and stick it out. But obviously the situation in the story is very different. Like, the guy actually died. He was deceased, and it's really creepy that they just put him in the back. So another thing that compounds that, according to BMO, only 41% of Canadians, actually no, my apologies, it's the other way around. So according to BMO, 41% of Canadians don't get travel insurance. So 4 out of 10 go on vacation with no sort of protection. So when something like this happens, a surprise expense or a surprise death, an accident, you're left having to foot the bill. And obviously something like insurance would have come in handy here. So after however long that drive took, they end up getting to the Quebec border crossing, and here they get stopped by the police. And imagine, like, this whole story is so absurd. Imagine the police officer, you're checking out the car, whatever, doing your routine inspection, and you notice like someone in the back not moving, looking kind of pale, right? And I guess you ask, like, what's wrong with that guy? And then they're basically forced to expose the truth, like, he's dead, he's a corpse. Like, that would have shocked me as an officer. I'd be like, what? So obviously the officers had to take these people into custody because it's already weird having a dead body in your car. You can't automatically assume the story they're telling you because it's their duty basically to do an investigation now. So the cops looking into it, and currently what I just told you is the story that the mother and the son told. We don't really have any reasons to doubt that right now. It seems plausible. And yeah, so we're basically going to see the outcome of that in the coming days. But to me, it really speaks to, I guess, healthcare systems and the need for insurance if you're traveling abroad, because it can get really expensive if something were to happen to you. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're forced to make a choice. Like, in this case, it's highly disturbing, and it's really sad too at the same time. Like, the death of a loved one, like, you shouldn't have to make a decision like this where you're just going to load the body up and have to stick with that, like, on your way home because you can't afford to have the proper arrangements in the current place you are. And, like, I'm going to be silly for a second. Like, even imagine the smell. I'm not too sure what the conditions were of the body along the way, but I would assume, like, this is more than a single day's worth of driving. I would assume that something starts happening to the body in terms of decomposition, and that's a long road trip. That's pretty ew to me. So, like, get insurance if you're traveling, just in case something happens like this. And most of the time, it's affordable. And another thing that this story made me realize was how lucky we are in Canada to have a system where we're not afraid to go to the hospital, go to the doctors, because we'll get bankrupted by the costs. And that's really a major benefit to living in a nation like we have here, and we should be grateful for the infrastructure that's set up. It's really amazing, top class, except for the wait times. Like, there's obviously downsides to it, but I feel like the pros definitely outweigh the cons in this case. And the situation here is extremely unfortunate. Wishing these guys the best, and I hope they get through it, because now they're dealing with, on top of the death of, so the guy's father and the wife's husband, Now they got to deal with an investigation where they basically are being treated like culprits because they don't know, right? The investigators, whether or not the story played out like it did. So now they're going to have to investigate and question them, stuff like that. So it must be a really tough time, and I feel for them. So that about does it for today. Thanks for joining me on the Perri platform. I'll see you soon.